that 2017 was really the first time in my career that I saw large numbers of students signing petitions to get their professors fired for their speech. And I always have to really emphasize, that is historically not normal.
Older, rich, white males were much more positive on the First Amendment as a whole and on freedom of expression. We are viewing free speech as a zero-sum game right now. Everybody wants to use their free speech to win. But free speech is not a zero-sum game. Free speech is a 340 million sum game.
As of this survey, the right has caught up to the left, and now about 1 in 3 students say that, at least in some circumstances, violence can be acceptable in response to speech.
Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to present our next panel. My name is Ashkhen Kazaryan. I'm Senior Legal Fellow at the Future of Free Speech. And without further ado, we have Greg Lukianoff from FIRE, President and CEO, and Kevin Goldberg, Vice President of Freedom Forum. Gentlemen, so free First Amendment lawyers walk onto a WWE stage and talk about how 2025 has been the calmest year they've had in their career.
Yeah, we're thinking about closing down.
How's your sleep? How's it been?
Looks like nothing going on.
Nothing going on? So let's open up. We're here today to do something lawyers never do. We're here to talk about numbers. Tell the audience what surveys your organizations have done this year. Kevin, we'll start with you.
Yes, so every year we do the First Amendment Where America Stands survey, and we release the results on September 25th, which everybody in this room at least knows is First Amendment Day. And it is a survey that looks at what Americans know about the First Amendment and what they value about the First Amendment. So we do a number of year-over-year questions, a baseline set, and then have some new questions every year that are designed to meet the moment of the First Amendment, the issues of the year.
Greg, I mean, FIRE is known for their surveys and their rankings.
Yeah, the campus free speech ranking is one of the things we're better known for at this point. And the research department is kind of a passion project of mine. It was actually came out of the Coddling the American Mind, book as kind of a proof of concept that we needed more research. And so we just actually came out with our rankings earlier this month. And some of the interesting data that came out of that, we actually managed to publish a special article on it the day before Charlie Kirk was killed. And unfortunately, that data was that for a long time, there was a disturbing sort of enthusiasm for violence in response to speech that pretty much only came from the campus far left. And as of this survey, the right has caught up to the left, and now about 1 in 3 students say that, at least in some circumstances, violence can be acceptable in response to speech. This was also the first year we had 50% of students. So basically every year we try to give students a lot of examples of, say this person's invited with this point of view, like would you say that they shouldn't be invited? And the numbers were never good on this. But this was the first year that all 6 of the different hypothetical speakers we mentioned were opposed by 50% of all students. This is a calamity. The idea that you're admitting people to school who actually 1/3 of them thinks that violence can be acceptable in response to speech means that that something has failed profoundly at some link of the chain.
Greg, you're so good at this, but you answered the question I was going to ask you.
Oh,
so I'm going to turn to Kevin.
That wasn't the question you asked me?
I was going to say, in the light of Charlie Kirk's assassination, you did this data collection and the surveys before that happened. Now that that has happened, in the light of that, what are the lessons that the global and the U.S. communities can take from it? How do you see the landscape being affected?
Yeah, well, as part of our survey last year and this year, one question we asked was, is there a reason you feel you can't speak freely? And this is not a First Amendment, this is not a fear of government retaliation, though I will say we did ask this year a question about whether you have refrained from certain things, posting something online, joining a political group for fear of government retaliation, and the numbers were about a quarter. People said yes. The numbers were much higher for fear of social sanction. And so we asked, last year we found out that 71% of the people who responded said they feared a social sanction, 65% this year. Very interesting though was the reason. And we gave them a number of possible reasons. I mean, maybe not very surprising, but I was certainly a little surprised last year that number one was fear of a violent response. I was certainly surprised and disheartened by that. Number four was fear of being fired. And this was certainly more true. Certainly the fear of being fired and the fear of a violent response were more true amongst younger age groups than older. So we really need, I think when you're asking about what can we do, it's to reestablish, direct interaction, the understanding that the First Amendment gives everyone a right to speak and have your voice heard. And we just need to also, I think, empower people to listen more, of course. And we can talk about this. I know some of the questions we have will flesh that out a little more, but I would say that's just trying to get people to know their rights is the very first step.
Greg, so fire represents often people who speak up and get fired or face other consequences. In the experience that you have, what are the other top reasons, and how does this affect, this culture affect if people are self-censoring?
Yeah. Well, I was going to just say one other fact that we just discovered is the Scholars Under Fire database is one of, I think, the most important things that we do. And that shows how many professors get in trouble for what they say and how many times there are campaigns, usually from students, to get professors fired. And I always have to say here that 2017 was really the first time in my career that I saw large numbers of students signing petitions to get their professors fired for their speech. And I always have to really emphasize that is historically not normal. You're not, even when you find trashing or different things like this in the 1960s, you didn't have large numbers of students petitioning to get their professors fired for speech. This is new and horrible, but even potentially more horrible is not even potentially, even more horrible is this year was the first year that we had a clear winner in terms of where the most pressure was coming from in terms of trying to get professors fired. That wasn't students or professors or administrators. It was the state. And that's our number one enemy. I'm definitely really concerned about groupthink. I'm really concerned about mob censorship, a phenomenon that students oftentimes don't understand, is that when you shout down a speaker, you're essentially making yourself the arbiter of what everyone else is allowed to hear. That's a very totalitarian way of thinking about things. But nothing is worse than state pressure to get a professor fired or a student expelled.
So FIRE has the National Speech Index that shows some public pressure and some public appetite for federal pressure on universities over issues like anti-Semitism and over the Israel-Palestine conflict, while significantly less support exists for punishing the pro-Palestinian speech with arrest and deportations. Can you tell us a little more about that?
I'm sympathetic to the idea that universities need to do more about anti-Semitism, because I think they let slide a lot of behavior that was flat out that would have actually counted as anti-Semitic harassment, even by FIRE's a demanding definition, and demanding but also legally appropriate definition, which is that harassment is when you target someone for their identity and it's severe, persistent, and pervasive, such that it effectively denies someone a full access to their education. And not only do we think that that's the right definition, we think people should be punished for engaging in that kind of harassment, not just it's acceptable to us. And so there was outright assault, there was outright threats against Jews. There was a lot. Columbia was probably the most vulnerable school in the country to that examination. So I don't blame the public for being sympathetic to the idea that campuses have put up with. As Barry Weiss likes to point out, these are schools that oftentimes talked about the horror of fat phobia, but had a complete double standard when it came to people saying things a lot like, I think Jews should be killed. So there was a big double standard here. But I do think at the same time, we've seen this legitimate concern about anti-Semitism used by the administration to go after speech that wildly exceeded anything that might be considered unprotected speech or unprotected anti-Semitic speech. So for example, probably one of the worst cases there was the Rumeysa Ozturk case. This was a student at Tufts University. She wrote an op-ed that would have been pretty mainstream in any newspaper in the country, and her argument was a pretty a modest plea that essentially she thought that Tufts should divest its investments from Israel. I don't agree with that, but who cares? She was the video that a lot of you probably saw of the student who was walking along, seemingly minding her own business, and non-uniformed, just people show up and basically stuff her in a van. Next thing you know, she's flown to Georgia and then to Louisiana. She is held in prison effectively, and it took, I think, about a month to get her out. And this was something that, Joe Rogan, who voted for Trump, was like, no, this is not the country I want to live in. This is not okay. And I think most Americans agree with that. That certainly, we can disagree with some of the people who came over on student visas. And yeah, if they engaged in criminal behavior, by all means, send them back. But if you're talking about someone can't come from another country, like my parents, by the way, came to this country, my dad on a student visa, can't come to this country and disagree with the policy of the government without getting deported, that's un-American.
So I'm going to put both of you on the spot 2 days ago.
And yet, by the way, we did ask that question, and 19% of our respondents said that a non-citizen studying in the United States should be deported if they express a negative opinion of the country. 1 in 5 Americans said that.
And I believe that too, because we take such flack for this position, and because we actually have a lawsuit naming Marco Rubio, saying that this provision that actually says that Rubio can essentially kick out any foreign national in the country, there's one provision that says he has to do it if he finds, in his sole opinion, by the way, if it's adverse to foreign policy. But then there's even another provision that doesn't provide that. It basically just says, Marco Rubio can kick any non-citizen out of the country effectively. And what's interesting is that this provision has been challenged exactly one other time, and it was found unconstitutional by Trump's own sister, which is a pretty good legal fact to have on your side. And what's funny, what's tragic here, well, it's tragic also that Trump's sister, who was a very well-respected judge, by the way, died in, I think, 2023 of cancer. The opinion that she came out with was overturned for completely unrelated reasons. But the only finding ever on this particular provision has been that it's unconstitutional. It's too much power to give to just one man, as Kanye would say. But how much hate mail we get for taking on this lawsuit, I'm used to it. I've been getting hate mail since my first 3 weeks at Fire. Actually, no, my first week at Fire. So I'm used to it. But it is amazing, how much hostility you get. And they immediately conflate it to, well, you're saying that people here illegally shouldn't be able to be, and it's like, no, you can actually, if they're here illegally, you can deport them for whatever reason.
There's a very blurry line between fan mail and hate mail, if you ask me. So my question was going to be, there is a court decision that came out of Massachusetts that the Knight Columbia Institute just won.
The AAUP one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you both read all 160 pages. Do you want to tell our audience about it? Or your high-level thoughts on the decision?
I read all 161 pages, and he points to me to start. I did, actually. It was quite an opinion. A lot of that was findings of fact. And the judge was very thorough. Judge Young from the United States District Court in Massachusetts was very thorough because he knows he's going to get checked.
Yeah.
He knows this is going to be appealed, probably all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the record. Let's put the record down. This is our chance. And as we've learned in a lot of Supreme Court cases, how the record is portrayed is quite often determinative of how the case is decided. But basically, the judge found that it was a clear First Amendment violation that very quickly up front in the first couple paragraphs says, the question here is whether citizens and non-citizens have the same First Amendment rights, and the answer is unequivocally yes. Yeah. And that's right up front. That is the nut graph, as they say, and that is the answer. And then goes in to talk about how the administration, it was not just Trump, of course, but the suit was filed against Kristi Noem, against Marco Rubio, and how there had been this really concerted effort to retaliate against students who engaged in protected political speech, and then also an Administrative Procedure Act violation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the judge was right, and there's a 1945 case called Bridges v. Wixon, that actually did say that if you're in this country legally, you have the same First Amendment rights as other citizens. So it was good to see that. I do think it's likely to be narrowed if it's appealed, and possibly overturned if it gets to the Supreme Court. And I think that was regardless of whether or not the judge came in so hot, I would say, in the opinion. But it's a fun opinion to read, which is not necessarily always a good sign for whether or not it will be upheld.
If you really want to read the fun part, just go to page 147 onward for First Amendment purposes, and that's the flowering.
Jump ahead
language.
To 147.
Yeah, if you want to read the fun pro First Amendment part, that's the one I would recommend.
So speaking of the fellow youths, in the Where America Stands survey, it says that Gen Z is less likely than boomers to speak out because they fear retaliation. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is?
They have more to lose. I think there's a lot more interaction in their world. Obviously, Gen Z is more in school on college campus. They have a lot more direct interaction perhaps than boomers with other people every day of their lives. They have more to lose. I mean, certainly when it came to fear of being fired, Gen Z and Gen Y were much more afraid of this than boomers and even Gen X. I think there is also just a general fear of, and this was not a First Amendment question. This was a social sanctions question. Am I being chilled? But I think there's just a general fear that we found that abides by, the older, rich, white males were much more positive on the First Amendment as a whole and on freedom of expression. And that is something we've seen for a number of years now.
Because this panel, I'm going to get right to you. Because this panel is very innovation forward, we're going to take questions via the internet. If you prefer Twitter, X, or Blue Sky, please tweet your questions. The hashtag is GFSS2025. And then we're going to take your questions. We do want to hear from you. GFSS2025. Greg, youths are scared. I have a feeling you might know why.
So FIRE has an amazing internship program, and actually, a lot of our best employees actually come from the internship program. And I remember that's very competitive, very hard to get in. And I remember, I talk to the interns every year, and several years ago I talked to them, and they're all so bright and shiny and optimistic and all this stuff. And I started talking about basically the kind of cancel culture that they grew up with. And they all got grave and dark. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty much kill or be killed. I'm like, what? I'm like, excuse me? And they were talking about how essentially they were growing up with people keeping compromat, basically like compromising materials on each other in case someone came to cancel them. And I was like, this is dystopian. And then when, and Abigail Shrier's great book, Bad Therapy, which I think is, I wrote a follow-up to Coddling of the American Mind, my book with John Haidt. I think Abigail Shrier's, and then I wrote called Canceling of the American Mind, something that I wrote with Ricky. I think Bad Therapy might be a better follow-up to Coddling of the American Mind. It's just excellent. No offense, Ricky. I'm very proud of Abigail's book. I thought it was so good. But she talks about, talking to students, interviewing students who are doing this very thing, keeping texts that were on PC on their friends in case they ever came for them. So I can understand why they might be a little more spooked than boomers, but boomers always have, no. I was just about to give a very Gen X opinion of boomers, but I respect boomers very much.
So FIRE rankings give most schools failing grades on their free speech culture.
Yeah.
I believe only 11 schools got more than a C.
Yeah.
Or higher. Vandy did climb in the rankings. I do want to shout out Vandy.
It's number 7. It's lucky.
Yes. What do you think schools can do better? Like, what's your advice to schools that are not failing? Listen, I'm in an Armenian household. C is a fail. So what should people do to not fail?
Well, I mean, I think that we're trying to really say that they could go so much further, like all of these schools. So number 1 this year was actually Claremont McKenna, which we were really glad to see back, being number 1. But I think even they were like basically a B-. And I think that we have to think hard. I mean, first of all, when you have 1/3 of students saying that violence is sometimes acceptable in response to speech, that's a fail right there. something like 60% or thereabouts of students saying that shout downs are acceptable. It's higher than, Sean, what was the actual number?
Around 70 now.
70? Okay, 70% of saying that shout downs are sometimes acceptable. Blocking ways to speech is like, that's something you really have to address. And I think there's lots of ways you could do it. Vanderbilt has a great orientation. Every school in the country should have an orientation, but it can't just be First Amendment law. It's got to be about free speech culture. And there's so many different ways you can train this as well, including having programs where people, part of the point is that they take the point of view opposite from what they actually believe and have to defend it. Because as soon as you do this, and you learn this from law school as well, it's very hard to maintain that your opponent is stupid and evil if you've actually had to figure out why they came to their argument in the first place. But there's a lot schools can do.
I would like to note that my alma mater, James Madison University, failed. I very much agree. It's got to start from the start. And we heard Ricky talk about people coming into college without any knowledge of the First Amendment and what it protects. We are working on this. Plug, shameless, not shameless plug. We have materials out there that are part of a new campus pilot program that we are working on, where every incoming student at the universities we're working with gets both a physical and access to a digital version of some of it is First Amendment law, like you mentioned, time, place, manner. Yeah, one of them is about time, place, manner restrictions. It's directly on that. So I was very excited to hear her say that was a point of emphasis. The other, another one is simply, what is the First Amendment here for? What does it protect? What is free speech? And also, what is hate speech and why is it protected? So it is about creating, it's both about teaching First Amendment law, but it's also about creating a culture of free speech right as the students walk in the door, and then we build on it from there.
That's great.
So I want to talk about the surveys again. Talking of, shameless plugs, we're influencers on the stage. For journalists, for policymakers, for civil society, we were supposed to have government folks here too, but the shutdown happened. So for government workers who are going to watch this, hopefully after the shutdown is done, how can they use these surveys to make the free speech culture better?
Mm-hmm. How can they use the surveys to make the free speech culture better? This is what we think about. This is why we have the surveys, so that we can inform our own work on these topics. Like I said, I think understanding who you need to reach is number one. Understanding the misconceptions is a big one. We didn't ask this question this year because we had so much data on it, but 3/4 of people don't understand that the First Amendment doesn't apply to private workplaces. That's like First Amendment law 100, not even 101. I mean, the first 5 words, right? Congress shall make no law. Mm-hmm. And people don't know this. I think it is really, again, it's being honest about what the First Amendment protects and what it doesn't. Don't disillusion people, I think, to believing things that aren't correct just to pump them up, give them false sense of hope. Give them the true data, but tell them why it matters. And this is what we do at Freedom Forum. I mean, our mission, we are not an advocacy organization. Our mission is foster First Amendment freedoms for all. And we envision an America where everyone knows, values, and defends the First Amendment. Knowledge leads to value, value leads to defense.
Yeah. And my whole idiosyncratic reason for, like, my personal favorite justification for freedom of speech is epistemological. It's essentially, there is a value in knowing what people really think, full stop. And that value is almost limitless. If you're a humanist, if you care about humanity, it's really important to know what people really think. And I think even a scientific standpoint, but also as a interpersonal standpoint, all of these reasons, this knowledge is key, and it's impossible if people are lying about what they actually believe, if you don't know what they actually believe, if they're not willing to say what they actually believe, if they don't feel the ability to engage in candor. Then you're flying blind. So a big part of the spirit of the research department is essentially to figure out what people really think. And unfortunately, we've learned some really troubling things from that. And in some ways, we've learned that the problem is actually even worse and deeper than we thought. But knowing might not be quite half the battle, but it's a key first step.
So I have 2 questions for you. Again, if y'all have any questions for our audience, we're going to do them. Please use Twitter or Blue Sky, #GFSS2025. So these 2 questions are what I would call superhero questions. If you were a superhero and you had the ability to make every American like learn one statistic or one thing that fire has done that they should know, what would it be? Like you already said, Congress should make no law. So like you have to give us something different.
Yeah.
One thing from the Where America Stands survey.
It's also very basic and very, very depressing. We ask a question every year: how many people can name the 5 freedoms without aid? This year it was, yes, this room, I want better numbers. This year was actually twice, the number of people that can name all 5 was pretty much twice as high as last year. It was only 10%. 1 in 4 cannot name a single freedom of the First Amendment. Very basic, very depressing. I don't, we could argue that it doesn't actually move the needle, but when you start from that point, I mean, how are you going to teach the rest when we can't teach the first step? And so that would be my number one. It always is.
What about you? One thing that the Americans should all know.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, like if I had superpowers, and I'm going to take my superpowers to give myself 2 wishes.
No.
To convey things. One is that freedom of speech is one of the best tools ever invented for peace, is something that people don't really get. And I think this was so horribly driven home by the murder of Charlie Kirk to make the point that like sometimes, and this argument has always driven me insane, speech is violence, that you sometimes would hear this rhetorical flourish on campus, but a lot of students actually believe this, is that particularly harsh words can be violence. And I always say this is the kind of, and forgive the borrowing from Rob Henderson, the kind of luxury belief you can only actually engage in peaceful times. As soon as you actually have experience with real violence, that just sounds criminal to say something like that. So first of all, understanding how essential free speech is for peace, I'd like people to understand. But also I'd like people to understand that the cure for censorship is curiosity.
All right, well, those are good answers, so I'm going to forgive you violating the rules of my superhero game. The second question of a superhero game is, if there was one term in the free speech debate that doesn't help, it actually confuses people more than it helps, that you could retire, because we're not censoring anyone, we're not banning anything. But if you could retire from the public's mind, what would it be? You want to start?
He should go first this time. I went first last time.
Well, since we're being superheroes, do I get to say what superhero I'd want to be?
So like a
Molecule Man, just to be clear. But go on.
So something, I have a feeling I know your answer, but like...
As far as like something that is the bane of First Amendment lawyers' existence, it is fire in a crowded theater.
Okay.
It drives us freaking insane. It is from Oliver Wendell Holmes when he was still a bad guy on freedom of speech. It's this offhanded thing he said. It's like, sure, we should arrest communists and send them to jail and all that kind of stuff. Fire in a crowded theater. Like it's just a snarky, smart old dudes like thing that actually everybody wants to use from then on. But even then, people don't use it right. It is the falsely shouting a fire in a crowded theater such that it causes a panic. By the way, there is no case law that that's actually illegal. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, literally shouted fire in the course of this very popular play, often 2 crowded theaters, every night for tens of thousands of probably productions. It is literally probably not true, but of course the way this gets used is it just becomes fire. Well, we all know fire at a crowded theater, and that's why nobody should ever say anything mean about me. Is people pull this out in the most ridiculous circumstances. So and for First Amendment people, when we hear it, like our eyes just roll so far back in our heads. So, that's one I would like to retire.
So I guessed that. You owe me $5.
Yeah.
Kevin, can I guess yours? You go.
Well, he might have just stolen my answer, so I have to come up with one on the fly here.
That's why I looked at you to go first. You're going to say fire in a crowded theater.
It was only fair. I think maybe I have a recency bias on this one because I had to come up with it quick, but that hate speech is not incitement. I was asked this question by Angel Latham a few weeks ago, one of our First Amendment reporters. She's based here in Nashville, covering nothing but the First Amendment. We have 5 of them, and for their local communities and for USA Today. And she asked me about what it's been like in the last few weeks. Kind of your opening question. I said, For an organization who seeks to educate, engage, and inspire people around the First Amendment, the engagement part has been incredibly easy, sadly, in the last month, because people are active and they're talking about it. They want the information. Just feed it to them. The education has still been hard. I did not think I would have to, I did not directly educate her, but I did not think I would have to educate the Attorney General of the United States on the issue of incitement versus hate speech.
I know she's going to watch this after the shutdown is done.
Good. She needs to, because she got it wrong.
Yeah.
If we succeed over the next 5 years, I'm a child of Soviet Union, so I only think in 5-year terms.
5-year plans.
So in the next 5 years, if we were to succeed, what will it look different in everyday life, at work, in class, online?
Well, first of all, we're not going to do it in 5 years. But I do think that
You're still a superhero. Come on.
Well, if I could, but in terms of what the benefits of free speech can actually be, I mean, it's central to what actually allows us to be human. If you can't tell your story, if you have to self-censor your story, storytelling is the oldest technology our species has. It is powerful. In some ways, it's too powerful, but it is something that is incredibly powerful. But if you can't tell your authentic story, and you're forced to sort of lie about who you are, in what sense are you actually free? So what we need to have, if we have a culture where people can actually talk to each other and not just try to prove each other wrong, but actually be interested in listening to find out where those other people are coming from, then we really stand a fighting chance to be as great as we're capable of being.
We are very aligned on this. So I think one of the problems is people misunderstand the purpose of speech in the marketplace of ideas. So we've talked about this. We had an event last week in conjunction with our survey release, and I used this example that we went to South by Southwest last year in 2024. And I was having a lot of conversations with people at our installation. And a lot of people would come up and they would talk about free speech, and they would say, well, it's just not working. We need, people are talking past each other and nobody's listening, and social media is a cesspool. And my first answer was always, well, what is your alternative? And our survey did note that 48% of the respondents would be okay with giving government the power to correct misinformation on social media. But I think people are also just getting it wrong. The purpose of the First Amendment isn't to change minds. The purpose of the First Amendment is to allow you to even speak in the first place. And so here's what I think the 5-year difference looks like. In 5 years, we are viewing free speech as a zero-sum game right now. Everybody wants to use their free speech to win. But free speech is not a zero-sum game. Free speech is a 340 million sum game. And that's what it looks like. Everybody is bought into the idea of speech, not winning speech.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to the audience questions because I want to make sure we get at least a few. The first one is, there's so much emphasis on higher education, but it feels like by then habits have been set. Should there be more attention to middle school and high schools, to train kids to respect or even value opinions of those with whom they disagree? I'm actually going to go to Kevin first because he recently complained to me about talking to middle schoolers.
Yeah, I mean, they're scary. I've never, I'm nervous today before this crowd, but I've never been more nervous than I went in to go to talk to my friend's 8th grade classes. And it's also a great test run, right? Because as you said, you were speaking to college students, some of them tune out, some of them left. Middle schoolers are tough.
Okay, I want to be clear. Those are the football players and are going to practice. No one else has walked out of my class in 10 years.
But the answer is certainly yes, we need more at the lowest levels possible. Obviously, we need to get people in the door early and try to grab them. And that's, to me, it's always kind of the same message, regardless of the age group you're talking about, the same themes. You're just changing the examples and changing the catch, right? The thing that grabs them. And so, yeah, let's grab them early. Get them in the door, even if they only retain 1 or 2 or 3 things from what you've said. Get them intrigued, as Greg said, get them thinking and move it on from there, but get them in the door.
Middle school internship at FIRE?
Well, yeah, we actually do. FIRE actually has a program now, and we've only been doing it for 2 years, but it's a week-long program for high school students where they go. Last year they went to American University for a whole week, and we they get to talk to free speech heroes. They get to talk to Mary Beth Tinker, for example, and Daryl Davis. We teach them about the philosophy of freedom of speech, the practice of it, all this kind of stuff. So we are trying to reach out to people younger. So I definitely think you should start younger as well. And I practice this in my own life, because I have a 9-year-old son named Benjamin, named for Benjamin Franklin, and a 7-year-old son named Maxwell, for James Clerk Maxwell. And people, when I first had kids, I remember all these people being like, okay, Mr. First Amendment, Mr. Free Speech, like, do you have free speech in your own house? And I'm like, well, I try to teach them the most fundamental value of freedom of speech, the value that actually precedes it, what actually makes freedom of speech useful to you, which is intellectual humility. And we have all sorts of sayings in my family, including smart is something you do, not something you are. And hearing my kids repeat this to me, like, it couldn't make me happier. And I've also been working on a free speech comic book forever that I'll never finish.
So there's a question for you. Greg, do you agree with Joan Tomasi that whatever the merits of a Trump admin actions, there is a new opportunity to course correct universities on free speech?
Great question. I was just writing a piece about this. So we are opposing overreach by the Trump administration. We are in lawsuits with the Trump administration. We are fighting it tooth and nail when they violate the Constitution. But at the same time, because of the efforts that the Trump administration is making, I've seen in the higher education reform movement a lot of people being awfully shy about saying that higher education needs reform. I am not among them. The fact that someone's doing it poorly doesn't mean it shouldn't be done at all. It needs to be done. And I've been fighting the nonsense on campuses for 25 years. So I think it's actually more important than ever that we have good ideas on how reform should look, rather than to offer the administration, rather than just being like, well, just the status quo, that we're going to settle for the status quo. So I think that, one of the things I really want to grow at FIRE is our higher education reform department. I want to do a lot more of that. We were actually planning on doing more of it this year, but then we ended up fighting a lot of the things that the Trump administration was doing that really overreached. But it is absolutely key, and it's a goal we cannot give up on. Larry Summers says the same thing. It's like, we must resist the overreach against Harvard, but we still must reform.
So the next question is, how do you think, though, the alleged tension between opposing cancel culture and supporting a right of free association, when employers say they don't want to employ people with views they find personally unacceptable?
I mean, that is obviously a question we've seen a lot in the last month. We saw it so much that we finally just did a frequently asked questions column about everything we saw coming up. I shouldn't laugh about this, but I mean, it's become just absurd that we keep having these misconceptions to some degree about where the lines are drawn and about why it's still important to have a culture of free speech. And we've talked about it a lot already in the first 37 minutes and a half of this session, which is, I can count, I'm a soccer referee. I can count down from 45 in my head. It's just about, what are you trying to achieve in your workplace? Heterodoxy? Are you trying, yeah, I mean, are you just going to try to have one point of view? Are you going to have a thriving, I will use the term marketplace of ideas in your own workplace? And I will say, I acknowledge it is very hard to do. One of our key goals this year, alongside educating the public about the First Amendment at Freedom Forum, is ensuring our nonpartisanship. We are committed to being nonpartisan. And even in our workplace, I know that we probably skew one way, and that affects our work. We are always at least we are acknowledging it, and we are checking it constantly. I am checking myself constantly. To go the other way and just lean into one groupthink is never going to get your job done effectively. You're going to lose. We just know it as everyone in this room who is a supporter of free speech and free thought. We know you're going to lose. You're going to lose. You're going to cheat yourself.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, since I draw this distinction between First Amendment and cancel culture, I always have to be very clear. You have a First Amendment right to engage in cancel culture. If you want to go after that pizza boy who was wearing the MAGA hat or wearing the white dudes for Kamala T-shirt, you have every right in the world to do that. However, I do think that if you consistently succeed, that's bad for democracy. And so what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that you should be banned from doing that. That would be a free speech violation. But what I am saying is, take a deep breath, people, and do you want to live in the kind of country where you can have a strong opinion and a job, but not both? I have been asked if I want to make this a law. And I say, absolutely not. I do not want to have a law that you cannot be fired for your political belief. Because one thing I know about abuses of power, well, first of all, I respect groups' free association rights. Second of all, we would actually litigate against it if someone tried to pass that. But second of all, I know how it would actually be reused in the real world. Every single employee you had that you're trying to get rid of for cause would say, actually, it's about my political beliefs. It would be a disaster. But so I'm trying to address this from a cultural standpoint, and what we saw both in 2020 and in the last month, people losing their jobs for expressing strong opinions. Yes, they can do it, but I want people to think long and hard about if they really want to live in a country like that.
The most important question that is on my list for both of you to answer. No. Okay. What do you both think of the new Taylor Swift album?
I'm a big Taylor Swift fan.
Okay.
I did hear that one of her songs is
called Canceled.
It's called Canceled?
There's a song called Canceled.
I did not even know that.
See, that's why you got to prep, Greg. I sent this in an email. Okay, let's ask the real question that I want to ask you.
You think I read emails?
You said you were going to
I did warn you, yeah. I believe the survey said that 52% of Americans support government interference on social media platforms. Is that correct? And if so, what do you make of that? I have so many feelings about that, but I'm a moderator, so I'm going to ask both of you.
What did you say again?
Oh,
you said it really
social
fast.
media,
Yeah.
Social media platforms. 52% of Americans support government intervention when it comes to social media platforms.
I think they should be careful what they wish for. I think I understand that if you don't think that through too much and haven't done
it's like one step. It's like, who do you support in government? Now flip it to who you don't support. Do you want them to be in charge?
Yeah. If you'd ask the additional question of okay, who do you choose to be in charge of that?
Who's bizarre?
Let's say Trump's in charge of it. You'd immediately get, I think that would plummet pretty fast. So I do think that a lot of times, and this is something that I think America is losing to some degree, and I want us to get it back, is that we are a weirdly libertarian country historically. We don't think every solution has to come from the top down. And I think we're right about that. I think it's one of the things that makes us so strong and innovative in so many different ways. It's the default in almost every other country in the world that a lot of solutions have to come top down. So there's always that sort of but it was actually an old American joke saying there ought to be a law as being kind of the simplistic way to think your way through. But people, when they're angry, they think there ought to be a law and that will fix all of our problems. And it just creates new ones. I
want to fit in last question. I find this one interesting. Is the fighting words doctrine a danger to First Amendment protection? It seems highly subjective. How do I know what will make you fight?
You don't want to know what'll make me fight.
Please on Twitter, tell us who you think would win in a fight, Kevin or Greg?
We had this joke earlier, about this. Sorry. I'm looking at that right there. I want to clear up one misconception, because it is a misconception that I don't want to stand. Is not that I think freedom forum skews one way, has a preponderance toward one way. It's that I know, basically through talking through everyone at at our offices, that there's probably more of a bent one way or the other amongst the people. And we work very hard. Individually, people probably skew one way, but we work very hard as an organization to get back to that. And I've never fought anyone in the office over a difference. I mean, the fighting words doctrine is I would have expected that we talk about a different exception, because the fighting words doctrine is one that really is on its last gasp for a while, or it seemed, and now maybe it's coming back, right? I will say that is interesting. And I still think that the point is that we have to remember to construe these all very narrowly. Give free speech the breathing space needed to survive, as the court said in New York Times versus Sullivan. And so the fighting words doctrine is, something we've talked about lately, but not something that is taking precedence for me in my mind right now.
That's what the crowd wanted to know, Greg.
So real quick, fighting words doctrine, it's a case from the 1940s. It involved I think Jehovah's Witness, an activist who called a police officer a fascist and the mayor a damned racketeer. And this was something that was, and basically, like, it's a very macho opinion. It's kind of like, well, anybody would have slugged someone if they said that to their face. It's like, I would have slugged them too. Like, that's kind of the way the opinion reads. Weirdly, and there was someone who was completely incredulous to this, like basically being kind of like, well, the left never embraced the fighting words doctrine. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, this was the basis of the speech codes movement, at least one of the pillars of the speech code movement, starting in 1985. Like, there were like Richard Delgado, kind of the founder of the speech codes movement. This was his preferred technique, and I always have to explain to people on the left who thought they liked the fighting words doctrine. I'm like, think this through. Do you think you should go to jail for calling a cop a fascist? Like, well, no. It's like, then you don't support the fighting words doctrine. So hopefully it's on its last legs, but it's being revived by the right at the moment.
We see now the reason for a strong First Amendment protection that applies equally. When you talk about people wanting to get government, intervening, stepping in, there ought to be a law. Be careful what you wish for, because we are definitely seeing that flip flop now more than ever, back and forth as to, whoa, whoever's in power, that's going to change everything.
Go to Freedom Forum and FIRE websites and look at their surveys and all of their work. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen. This was wonderful.